went dead silent. Not the comfortable kind, the dangerous kind. The kind where everyone stops breathing because they know something's about to break. Frank Sinatra sat frozen in his chair, scotch halfway to his lips, eyes locked on the gun in Sammy Davis Jr.'s hand. Dean Martin, leaning against the bar, set his glass down slowly. Very slowly. And Steve McQueen stood in the middle of the room with his arms crossed, watching it all unfold with those ice-blue eyes. The gun wasn't pointed at anyone. That wasn't the point. The point was that it existed. That Sammy Davis Jr., the man Sinatra had been humiliating for the last 20 minutes, was now holding a weapon with the kind of casual precision that made everyone in that room recalculate everything they thought they knew. It was 1963, the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas, and Steve McQueen had just done something nobody did to Frank Sinatra. He'd called his bluff. Let's go back 3 hours. To understand what happened in that room, you need to understand what Las Vegas was in 1963. It wasn't the family-friendly theme park it would become. It was raw, dangerous. A place where mob money built casinos and movie stars came to play by different rules. And at the center of it all was the Rat Pack: Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, Joey Bishop. They owned Vegas in the early 60s. Their shows at the Sands were sold out months in advance. Their parties were legendary. Their power was absolute. But inside that power structure, there was a hierarchy. And everyone knew it. Frank Sinatra was the king. Not just the leader, the king. What Frank said went. Who Frank liked prospered. Who Frank didn't like disappeared. Dean Martin was the prince. Cool, detached, protected by his indifference. He'd go along with Frank's games, but he never really participated. Just watched, smiled, drank. And Sammy Davis Jr.? Sammy was the jester, the most talented performer in the group, better singer than Frank, better dancer than anyone, better impressionist, better musician. But he was black, and in 1963, even in Vegas, even in the Rat Pack, that meant something. Frank loved Sammy, genuinely loved him, but Frank also used him, made jokes at his expense, pushed him to perform on command, called him Smokey in front of crowds, made him dance when Frank was bored. And Sammy took it. Because what choice did he have? The Rat Pack gave him access, protection, legitimacy. Without Frank, Sammy was just another black entertainer in a country that didn't want to see him succeed. With Frank, he was untouchable. So when Frank made him the butt of jokes, Sammy smiled. When Frank asked him to tap dance at 3 in the morning, Sammy danced. That was the deal. But on this particular night, in November 1963, Steve McQueen was in the room. And Steve McQueen didn't understand deals like that. Or maybe he understood them too well and hated them. McQueen wasn't supposed to be there. He was in Vegas shooting second-unit footage for a film. Some exteriors, some driving shots. Nothing major. But he'd finished early, and someone had told him the Rat Pack was having a private party at the Sands. McQueen knew Dean Martin. They'd worked together, had mutual respect. Dean had invited him. Stop by if you're around. We'll be at the Copa Room. Private thing. So McQueen showed up around 11 p.m. Walked into the back room of the Copa Room, where the Rat Pack held court after shows. Cigar smoke hung in the air. Glasses clinked. Women laughed. And in the center of it all, Frank Sinatra held court. Literally. He sat in a leather chair like it was a throne, surrounded by hangers-on, yes-men, beautiful women who'd do anything to be near him. McQueen walked in, and the energy shifted. Not dramatically, just everyone noticed. Because Steve McQueen had a presence, not loud, not showy, just undeniable. He moved through the room like he owned it. Not arrogantly, he just didn't register other people's hierarchies. Frank noticed. Their eyes met for a second. Frank nodded. McQueen nodded back. No warmth. Just acknowledgement. Dean saw McQueen and smiled. Genuine. "Steve, you made it. Come get a drink." McQueen walked to the bar, ordered bourbon, and settled in next to Dean. They talked quietly. about nothing important. Cars. The weather. Dean's next film. And then Frank's voice cut through the room. "Sammy! Hey, Sammy, do the thing! You know the thing." The Kennedy impression. Sammy was sitting on a couch, talking to a dancer. He looked up, mid-sentence, and his face did something complicated. A flash of irritation, then resignation, then the practiced smile. "Frank, I just did it an hour ago." "I don't care. These people haven't seen it. Do it." The room got quiet, not because anyone was interested in the impression, but because they could hear the edge in Frank's voice. The command. Sammy stood up, and he did the impression. It was brilliant. Perfect JFK accent, the gestures, the cadence. Everyone laughed, applauded. Frank beamed like a proud owner watching his dog do a trick. McQueen didn't laugh. He just watched. Dean noticed, took a sip of his drink and said quietly, "Frank's been in a mood tonight." "He always like this with Sammy?" McQueen asked. Dean shrugged. "Frank loves him. Frank loves being in charge more." McQueen didn't respond, just kept watching. 10 minutes later, it happened again. Frank wanted Sammy to sing something. Sammy was tired. He'd done 2 shows that night already. "Frank, can we maybe—" "What? You got somewhere better to be? Sing the damn song, Sammy." And Sammy sang. No band, no microphone. Just stood there in the middle of the room and sang "Luck Be a Lady" a cappella. It was beautiful, flawless. The room went silent listening to him, and when he finished, Frank clapped once. "See, that's why we keep you around, Smoke." The nickname landed wrong. You could feel it. Sammy's smile tightened. A few people laughed uncomfortably. Dean looked at his glass, and Steve McQueen set his bourbon down on the bar. Hard enough that people heard it. Frank looked over. "Something wrong, Steve?" McQueen didn't answer immediately. He just looked at Sammy, then at Frank. Then he said, "You always make him perform like a circus animal, or is tonight's special?" The room went cold. Nobody talked to Frank Sinatra like that, not even other stars. Certainly not in his own space, surrounded by his people. Frank's face changed. The smile disappeared. "Excuse me?" McQueen stood up from the bar. Didn't rush, just stood. "I said, does he always have to dance when you snap your fingers? Or do you sometimes let him sit down and be a person?" Frank stood too. The 2 men were maybe 15 feet apart. Frank was older, smaller, but he had the room. This was his kingdom. "Steve, you don't know what you're talking about. Sammy and I go way back. We're family. Family doesn't make family perform for strangers." "He's not performing. He's entertaining. It's what he does." "No." McQueen's voice got quieter, colder. "It's what you make him do. There's a difference." Sammy tried to intervene. "Steve, it's okay, really." McQueen held up one hand. "Sammy, you don't have to defend him. And you don't have to perform." He looked back at Frank. "Unless Frank here thinks that's all you're good for." Frank's jaw tightened. "You got some nerve coming into my room and telling me how to treat my friends." "Your friends?" McQueen repeated. "Right. Is that what this is?" He turned to Sammy. "Sammy, show him what else you're good for." Everyone froze. Nobody knew what McQueen meant. Sammy looked confused. "Steve, I don't." "The guns, Sammy. Show him the guns." Now the room was paying attention. Frank looked genuinely confused. "What guns?" Sammy's face changed. Understanding. A flicker of something. Pride, maybe. Relief. He glanced at Dean. Dean, still leaning against the bar, gave the smallest nod. Permission. Encouragement. Sammy reached into his jacket. The room tensed. In 1963, in Vegas, in a room full of alcohol and egos, reaching into a jacket meant something. But what Sammy pulled out wasn't a threat. It was a Colt .45. Chrome. Beautiful. He held it loosely, comfortably, like it was an extension of his hand. Frank's eyes narrowed. "Sammy, what the hell?" But Sammy wasn't looking at Frank anymore. He was looking at the gun. And then, in one fluid motion, He started. The gun spun. Not wildly. Precisely. Sammy's fingers moved like a magician's. The weapon rotated around his trigger finger, flipped, reversed, spun again, faster, smoother. He ejected the cylinder, spun it, snapped it back, twirled the gun backward, forward, tossed it from hand to hand. Every movement was controlled, practiced, perfect. It was a gunfighter's routine, the kind of thing you saw in westerns, except those were choreographed, rehearsed, edited. This was real, raw, and impossibly fast. Sammy Davis Jr., the singer, the dancer, the impressionist, was handling that weapon like he'd been born with it in his hand. The room was silent. Not because people were scared. Because they were stunned. Nobody knew Sammy could do this. Nobody except the people who'd seen him practice for hours in his dressing room, learning every trick, every spin, every move. Sammy had grown up obsessed with westerns, with cowboys, with the idea of being fast, dangerous, respected, and he'd taught himself to be exactly that. After 30 seconds, which felt like 3 minutes, Sammy stopped. The gun settled in his palm, barrel pointed at the floor, perfectly still. He looked at Frank, then at Steve. Then he smiled. Not the performative smile, the real one. Steve McQueen nodded. Just once. Then he turned to Frank. You see that? That's not a trick, Frank. That's skill. That's discipline. That's a man who worked for something nobody asked him to work for, just because he wanted to be good at it. He let that sit for a second. Maybe instead of making him dance, you ask him what else he can do. Frank didn't respond. His face was unreadable. But his eyes stayed on Sammy, on the gun, on the man he thought he knew. Dean Martin broke the silence. He raised his glass and said, "Well, that was something." Then he looked at Sammy. "You've been holding out on us, Sam." Sammy holstered the gun, slowly, deliberately. "You never asked, Dean." McQueen walked toward the door. Didn't say goodbye to Frank. Didn't wait for a response. Just walked. But as he reached the exit, he paused. Turned back. Looked at Sammy one more time. "Next time someone wants you to perform, charge them. You're worth it." And then he left. The room stayed quiet for a long moment after McQueen was gone. Then Frank stood up, finished his scotch in one gulp, and walked out without saying a word to anyone. The party was over. Dean walked over to Sammy, put a hand on his shoulder. "You okay?" Sammy nodded. "Yeah, I think so. Frank's gonna be pissed." "I know," Dean smiled. "Good. He needed that." He clinked his glass against Sammy's shoulder. "Steve McQueen's got balls. I'll give him that." Sammy looked at the door where McQueen had exited. "Yeah, he does." The fallout was subtle. Frank never confronted McQueen directly. Never brought it up. But people noticed the shift. The next time the Rat Pack performed, Frank was different with Sammy. Not soft. Frank Sinatra was never soft. But more careful. Less performative cruelty. More respect. It wasn't an apology. Frank didn't apologize. But it was acknowledgement. And Sammy? He started carrying that gun more. Not as a weapon, as a reminder. A statement. That he wasn't just a singer, or a dancer, or a comedian. That he had depth, danger, dimension. He'd show the gun trick to people backstage, on talk shows, in private. And every time people would react the same way. Shock. Then respect. Years later, in the 1970s, a journalist asked Sammy about that night. About Steve McQueen defending him. Sammy smiled. "Steve didn't defend me. He reminded me." "There's a difference." "Reminded you of what?" "That I didn't need defending. That I had power Frank couldn't touch. That I'd been performing for people my whole life, but I didn't have to. that I could stand still and still be dangerous. Did you thank him? Sammy shook his head. Didn't need to. He knew. This story isn't about guns. It's about respect, and the difference between being loved and being valued. Frank Sinatra loved Sammy Davis Jr. genuinely. But love, without respect, is ownership. And Steve McQueen saw that. He saw a man being treated like a mascot, like entertainment, like a pet. And McQueen, who'd spent his whole life refusing to be anyone's property, couldn't stomach it. So he didn't argue, didn't lecture, didn't make speeches. He just gave Sammy the stage. Let him show what he was capable of when nobody was making him perform. And in doing that, McQueen shifted the power in that room, made Frank Sinatra realize that control is an illusion, that talent doesn't need permission. That respect is earned, not given. Dean Martin understood. That's why he stayed quiet. Dean knew that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let someone else fight the battle. And Steve McQueen fought it without throwing a punch. Hollywood remembers the Rat Pack as Frank's group, Frank's show, Frank's legacy. And that's partly true. But in that room, on that night in 1963, it was Steve McQueen who reminded everyone, including Frank, that kings are only kings as long as people bow. And the second someone refuses, the crown slips. If you want more untold legacy about the moments legends stopped performing and started being themselves, subscribe. Because the best stories aren't the ones they sold, they're the ones they tried to bury.